Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
Why did the Washington Post write one of the longest articles in history just to bury Jim Jordan?
So you like to say burn the bones. I like to say pat down the grave. Either way, the Washington Post is guilty.
Oh, yeah. And I have to tell you, Michael, when I took a look at this, this may be the longest article I've ever seen the Washington Post publish. We tried to get all the ads off of it and then print it out in a PDF fashion so that you have it on single pages. On single pages, it was 40.
Wow.
So back to back, it'd be 20 pages, 28 and a half by 11 pages, all designed to bury Jim Jordan.
Now, we don't snap a crisp paper anymore, but if we were still printing papers, how many pages would that have been?
Could you imagine? I guess it would have been an entire special segment of the newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, a whole section of the newspaper dedicated to blasting Jim Jordan. Now, let's put this in context. I could understand why WAPO would be wanting to create this giant negative article about Jim, because it looked like Jim Jordan was about to become the Speaker of the House. And so this would have been sort of his welcome wagon gift from the Washington Post.
Yeah.
To sort of explain to everybody, you're as illegitimate as all the other people that have attempted to lead from the right or from the Republican circles. So, but since Jim didn't win the election, it seemed like all that paper would have gone to waste. So they went ahead and published it anyhow. Lightly
Massaging it to be a burn the bones versus a kill shot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is something that we start with. Now, doggone, this doesn't, you'll notice there's not breathless outrage here because, gee, what a surprise that the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, hates conservatives and will do anything within their power, including some of the most shoddy, belittling, embarrassing. I mean, all I can think of is Joe Vig right now.
You're insulting me and you're embarrassing yourself. I mean, this was 40 pages. On a story that is, 3 decades old?
At least, and wrapped all inside that story. So let's do a little bit of disclosure here. I can remember the first day that Jim Jordan walked into the office of the American Policy Roundtable. At that time, we had an office in Columbus, Ohio. We now have 3 offices in 3 different states, and we work with every state in the union in one way or another, either by radio or media, or actually involved on the ground in public policy. And so we had an office in Columbus, Ohio. I can remember the first time that Jim Jordan walked in that office. Now, we knew about Jim Jordan because he had been circulating petitions back in 1992 as a volunteer for Ohioans for Term Limits, which was a project that we ran in a statewide ballot initiative that turned into 3 ballot initiatives, all of which the people of Ohio approved with more than 65% of the vote, which had never happened before in the history of the state. Term limits were very popular back then. And Jim came into politics in that time period. And he started as a volunteer, getting people to sign petitions, putting up an ironing board outside a polling place and asking them to sign for term limits so that we could put this measure on the ballot. That's where he started. At that time, he was a homeschool dad, had 4 kids at home, and he worked a part-time job as a wrestling coach at Ohio State University while he was trying to get his master's degree. He was a nationally famous wrestler, almost had become a world famous champion wrestler. He was 1 match away from the Olympics, but he had a tremendous collegiate career, an amazing high school career. His name is synonymous with excellence in wrestling in the Midwest and in many parts of the country.
Can I interrupt and just to give people a vision? That's like saying what the Manning name is to football in Louisiana.
Yeah.
The Jordan name is to wrestling in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, and in the state of Wisconsin and a few other places where he and his brother both have held championships at the high school or collegiate level. So yeah, they're a pretty big deal. Okay, so that's the guy. And he ended up leaving the assistant coaching job at Ohio State University when he got his master's degree and went ahead on to try to run for state representative. Now, what's interesting about Jim's story is that he decided he was going to run for state rep. He was a nobody from nowhere, and no one in the political establishment in Ohio wanted him. I mean, they didn't want the guy. He was an unknown entity. He didn't have money. He didn't have a pedigree. He had a name in a field that was unrelated to politics. They could have cared less about Jim Jordan. So what he did like a championship wrestler is he went out and he built a constituency, knocking on doors and going to meetings and going to churches and going to home groups and going to families, and basically built a network of voters who supported him, and they elected him to the office of state representative. He did not make people happy in the state capitol for doing that because he wasn't their choice. He had to win a primary and then win a general. Okay. So he serves for a number of years as a state rep. And then because he believes in term limits, he resigns that position and then turns back around and runs for the Ohio Senate. That's the way term limits work in Ohio. You can go from one body to the next. You can't stay in the same body for more than 8 years. So he becomes an Ohio senator. Now, to do that, he had to win a primary. And to win that primary, he had to defy the establishment, bring that same network of people out to support him. But he had to build that base 3 times bigger because the state House seat is so small, the Senate seat's 3 times that bigger. And then he became a state senator. And then after serving 2 terms as a state senator, he was term limited. So he decided to run for Congress. And guess what? That's about 3 times the size of his state Senate seat. A House race for the U.S. House is about 3 Senate races. So what did Jim do? He took the army of supporters that he had built, tripled that army in size, defied the Republican establishment, ran against all the people that didn't want him to run against, and the people who supported him elected him.
This is a pattern.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the real deal. He was never wanted. And then as he's run over and over again for the House, which I'll tell you about in a second, but the party has tried to redistrict him at least twice and get him out of office by changing his district. And so everything they throw at him, he basically uses as tackling fuel. He gets out and he works harder than anybody else. People respect him. They appreciate him and they vote for him. Now, he's pretty much bulletproof in regards to being electable because over all these years, going back to the early 90s, this guy has been the husband of 1 wife. He's raised 4 kids. They've had their ups and their downs. He's had his wins and his losses, but he's the same guy.
Right.
And people like him. So so the establishment has thrown everything they can possibly throw at Jim, and he's pretty much stayed the guy that he always was. He's a
champion wrestler, and then goes on to be a coach. And then, by the way, while he's doing all of this running for office, he becomes a lawyer.
Yeah. He gets a master's degree and then goes on to get a law degree. Yeah. So what do you do with this guy? He came from nothing, absolutely nothing. And so now he gets to Congress. And what's interesting is he gets to Congress and he's probably got maybe 10 friends in that first year in the House. I mean, it was just, there were not a lot of friends. And they started the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
And the Freedom Caucus, I can remember when the Freedom Caucus had about 14 people, then it had about 20 people, then it had about 40 people. Then it split into other groups. But the point is, when Jim got to Capitol Hill, he might have had 10 friends if he looked hard. If you had said to him, someday you'll have a shot at being speaker and how many votes will you get? He would probably said 10. I mean, it didn't look good. But over the 17 years that he's been there have been more and more and more people like Jim show up in Congress. Now, I said the 17 years he's been there. To me, that's about 6 years too long. And I have shared this with Jim, and I shared it with his senior staffers saying, Jim, you ought to come home. You ought to come home. You ought to run for the U.S. Senate. You ought to run for governor. But, you shouldn't spend your whole life in that Congress because...
Why do you say that, by the way?
Well, because I firmly believe with all my heart that rotation in office is one of the key agencies by which we keep our system representative. Right now, when you go to work in the United States Congress, you are now 1 vote of 535 votes in the biggest corporation in the world, the biggest budget in the world. That budget has become so big, and there are so many people whose jobs are dependent upon that budget in the administrative state that it has turned not just into a corporation, it's almost turned into a corrupt mafia-like syndicate. It is a whole different world. Michael, when I first started going to Washington, D.C. years ago, decades ago, it was not the company town that it is today. It is it's like living in a mob world. I mean, everyone has a pecking order. Everyone has a title. Everyone has a pin for this or a pin for that. And there are made members and there are not made members. There are people who have seats at the table in the power curve and people who are on the outside looking in. And it's all about the money. It's about the jobs. It's about the administrative state control. It's much more than a swamp. It is an ocean of corruption because it is so big. And it's my belief that You should not spend your life trying to work your way up that syndicate. You should leave after a set number of years, let somebody else come in fresh and take over, and you do something else.
I've heard you say it's not enough to elect good people and then hope for the best. What I think I hear you saying when you're saying that is even a good person, if you stay too long, or if you make the game, if I can get to this committee or that committee or head this, I can do more for my people. You could even have great motives, good people with good motives. But what it takes to get there, you stay so long, you become a part of the ultimate problem, which is power top down that was supposed to be bottom up. You just become a part of the problem.
You end up navigating the process, not representing the people from back home.
Right.
Because you have to, you've got to play as a made member, and the people back home barely matter. They can't matter because you're there for them, but you're only worth it to them because you're in a position of power. You know what? At that stage in the game, something's desperately wrong. Because what's the power built on? The power's built on the myth that America is supposed to be a two-party system. It's not. George Washington and John Adams were two of the greatest thinkers and writers and founders of our country. They warned us very specifically that factional parties are a deadly fire, and they will destroy us if we let them get out of control. These political parties today are completely out of control. They simply exist to battle each other, to have the final say over how the money gets spent.
Michael began in talk radio over 30 years ago. David has been working in the field of public policy and media for over 40 years. They've been around and seen a lot. To learn more about Michael and David, visit 1850mainstreet.com.
I used an analogy because people are kind of taking, when I do radio, my live ads for companies. And it's not that I am like this great deliverer of a message. I really know these owners. I really know these companies. I'm really invested in where they're going. I really believe in their products.
You actually care about them.
I care, right?
Yeah. You want to see them prosper.
I found myself one time explaining to a sales rep, listen, and I used politics as the analogy. So follow me in this. It's really relevant. I said, in politics, people think, oh, I'm a Republican. There's more R's than D's now in the House. That's a victory. What, for the letter R? Because it doesn't represent anything. What's an R anymore, let alone what we've just seen, what's happening with the speakership. There are many types of R's, and even the R's in full control can't control themselves. I said, it's not enough to go out and sell a client. No, I want that client 5 years from now to be saying, this is how we built a business together. This is the role you played in building this business. In other words, I'm not here to just get the revenue for a short period of time. I'm here to build their business. I want to reach an audience and build their business. That isn't the goal. And then what often gets lost is that I have to be the guy because I'm 17 years in, and it would take somebody else 17 years to get where I'm getting. No, I think we'd be better off with somebody new starting their climb. That's what's lost. But so take Jim. We just went through this, and I love Jim Jordan. You know that. But here's a guy that had a pattern. He got to that. Nobody wanted him, and he got to that state house seat. And then he imposed terms on himself. And then he went and got that state Senate seat. And then he went and got that house seat. Why didn't that pattern stop? What?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And I think maybe it has to do with the size of the job. And now when we talked about term limits, we actually passed a term limits measure in Ohio. And that then was taken out when the Supreme Court ruled against the Arkansas term limits measure. They struck down all the measures that we passed back in 1992. And so we all know there's no term limits on Congress. That doesn't mean that there haven't been members who have term limited themselves, both in the House and in the Senate. I think when Jim started, he had about 10 friends. He decided quite spontaneously to run for the speakership and found out that he had about 190 friends. That's quite an accomplishment. But he also received from President Trump the Medal of Freedom. And I mean, Jim Jordan is a great American. And I'm very honored to have known his history. I don't agree with everything that Jim's done. I'm not comfortable with how tight he's been with Donald Trump. I think sometimes that makes me a little bit wary and a little bit concerned. But look, on the whole of it, Jim Jordan's done a great job for the people that he represents, and he's done a great job for our country. And he makes a better speech than Newt Gingrich makes because Jim lives it.
Yeah, the relentless wrestler and / Trump warrior is how he was portrayed in this Washington Post hit piece. I think is it relevant to discuss what the hit piece is about?
Oh,
Because
yeah, I think so.
Jim Jordan has lived such a clean life. What we're picking on is something someone else did at Ohio State University when he was a part-time 23-year-old assistant wrestling coach.
Yeah.
And for some reason, by the way, I guess the Washington Post probably blames him for whatever happened at Penn State University while we're at it. I mean, you know what? If you did a 40-page hit piece on Michael DelGiorno, you'll have some juicy stuff. That's all you got on Jim Jordan, and they still like a dog with a bone won't let go of this.
Well, it starts with the analysis of his character. They can't stand the fact that he's a wrestler, that when he goes, wherever Jim Jordan goes, he's a very unassuming person. I mean, it's not shtick that he doesn't wear a sport coat or a suit jacket in the Capitol. The only other person I've ever seen that was that way was Steve Largent, who also was a world-class athlete. All right. And whenever Steve Largent went, he intimidated people. I watched it happen. You saw it too. He intimidated them, 1, because he's a world-class athlete. 2, because his accomplishments are Hall of Fame stellar. 3, because he's an honest, decent family man. 4, because he has personal beliefs that are anchored in history. He knows what he's talking about. And 5th, he had quiet confidence. I watched him whistle his way across the halls of the U.S. Capitol, and he literally intimidated people because it's like he had a sense about him nobody else had. It made people uncomfortable. Jordan's the same way. Now, Jordan's a little more intense than Steve Largent.
Yeah, much more.
And okay, look, if we're going to do criticism, maybe Jim should discover decaf. He's pretty intense.
No, he's intense.
All right,
that's his personality, though. I mean,
it's his person, but you can't be what he is and not be an intense person. I mean, so they make a big deal about his wrestling as if he's kind of an out of control monster, and that when he's in any kind of human interaction, that his goal is to knock someone down and get on top. I'll tell you, I've seen Jim in all kinds of situations, high pressure, serious debates. Come on. He's really sharp at what he does. Yes, he's intense, but come on. This is the guy that would stop in a snowstorm and help you change your tire.
Sure. Let me ask you this. Do they hate, I mean, because what we're dusting out is it his aggressiveness? Is it the athlete in him? Is it the wrestler? Because that's what they made the headline.
That he works out stronger than anybody else in the Capitol gym?
Or they don't like this guy because he's a Christian. Or they don't like this guy that based on founding principles starts the Freedom Caucus and it grows. I have a more important question about the future of the reality and the future of the Freedom Caucus than that. Or is it because he's a conservative? I almost feel like, everybody can call themselves a Christian. I don't even know if that's enough definition anymore. That's why I say I just go straight to Galatians 2:20. I don't know what else. It's not enough to say you're a Christian. Is it enough to say you're a conservative? What's a conservative anymore if we haven't learned anything in the last month?
I'll tell you, I heard our mutual friend, W.B. Allen, do a tremendous talk on that recently, where he challenged some of the leaders of conservative publications in Washington, D.C., and he said, excuse me, conservatism is a mindset. It's not a party. It's not a set of doctrines. Conservatism is an attitude and a perspective on how you view reality in life. And that's all it is. People who say the conservative party, they probably don't know what they're talking about. The word is radically overused. So what I would say is that Jim is clearly historically accurate. He strongly believes in the founding. He strongly believes in the Declaration of Independence, and he lives it. So the challenge is that back when he was 23 years old, he's still the same guy. But when he was a 23-year-old part-time wrestling coach at Ohio State University, which has thousands of people employed in the athletic department and thousands of athletes from all different divisions of sports working out of the athletic department, he was one part-time employee at the university. Now, there was a professor there who was a tenured medical professor in the medical college by the name of Strauss. He had a problem, and his problem was he conducted himself completely inappropriately as a physician examining male athletes. We'll leave it at that. And so over time, the word kind of got around that you better watch out for this guy. And it was sort of a common conversation among these different divisions. Now, he was not the doctor for all the different teams, but he did provide medical services for the wrestling department. So what ended up happening was some people have now sued the university for negligence because they believe that they were abused by this doctor. And there's a big, big lawsuit that's been going on. The university's been paying out significant settlements. There's huge law firms involved. There's lots of money going back and forth. And some of these wrestlers wanted Jim Jordan to pick up their cause.
Because of who he is today.
Because of who he is today.
Probably more than he was then.
Exactly. Yeah, they hadn't talked to Jim about this for decades. But when it became something that they viewed, because time changed and they viewed that they could get some money out of the university, and I'm not doubting that what they experienced was real. It's just all the statutes of limitations on this, by the way, are gone. They're past. They're long past. And none of these people, when they had the opportunity to file any criminal charges, nobody decided to punch this doc in the nose either, in regards to defending themselves against inappropriate behavior. But the fact is that they wanted Jim to be involved in their cause. And Jim has denied that he honestly knew what was going on, that he was not involved in the situation. He was part-time. He did put in his hours. He left. He worked with intensity on the job, but he had 4 kids at home. He was a busy guy. And he did not have any zone for this.
Any idea what was going on? And
nor did he have any power. He's a part-time wrestling coach among thousands of employees. But now, because of who Jim is, about 10 years ago, these people started to come forward trying to make Jim the issue. Not because of what power he had when he was 23 years old, but because he was climbing up in Congress. Well, NBC News picked up on that. And NBC News New York, without a doubt, is the source of the worst news, the most bigoted propaganda, yellow journalism in America. NBC News New York Bureau. That's who broke this story on Jim a number of years ago. Now, it's been circulated around and around and around and largely dismissed, because there is no evidence of any wrongdoing on Jim's part. And he's never been indicted. He's never been a part of any of the settlements. But Washington Post wanted to make sure that the bones were burned and buried.
Patted down.
Decided to resurrect this story in 3 different places in this 20-page tome to make it look like all Jim had to say was, of course I knew about it because everybody knew about it. But because he says I didn't know about that, that means he's a liar too. On top of a over-caffeinated, hyper-aggressive, super workout, cinched belt, skinny waist, maniacal, abusing, bullying wrestler, he's a liar as well. That's the Washington Post story.
Well, it shows how far we've come away from true journalism. Any ability to be innocent until proven guilty. This is weaponized death of journalism stuff. I get that. This was probably intended if he had won the speakership, or if it was starting to get really close to do him in. So it's a hit piece. As far as Jim Jordan going from 10 friends to 190, what do you think kept him from getting to 217? Same thing. Christian, Freedom Caucus, conservative.
Let's do this. I got to get another cup of coffee. Let's carry that conversation on.
This conversation isn't over yet, so come on back next time and pull up a chair at 1850 Main Street. To help spread the word, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. We'll see you soon.